Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the News Behind the News with Ralph Cantava on Mix 94.7 FM. And I hope that you had a good day so far this afternoon. I'm glad to have the gentleman who's here with me. As I mentioned last year, which is really just last month, there were a few persons I noticed who came home on vacation. I was like, man, I got to bring it in while you're enjoying the sun, sea, and sand, just, to ensure that we can have the conversations as I try to pick your brain a little bit and talk about your experiences and stuff. And so I have here with me Mr. Carlvin Brooks. He is a law teacher at the Rotterdam University of Applied Sciences, and in particular, he has a passion for passion for people learning about education and entrepreneurship.
Correct.
And so, with that, good afternoon, Carlvin, and thank you so much for coming on the program.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having me here.
Okay, great. So while, I've known you for some time, I'm pretty sure there's some others out there who's wondering who this gentleman is. And so can you tell us a bit about yourself? And I'm also curious, on your take on your experience growing up in St. Martin as well.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carlvin Brooks. I'm from St. Martin. I grew up in South Reward. I used to live really close to Milton Peters College. And actually, I went to Milton Peters College also, and it was so that in the morning I would actually hear the bell, because MPC had like two different bells. Mm-hmm. I would hear the first bell, run out of my house, and be on time for the class. That's how close I was to the school.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And which primary you went to?
Oh, gosh. Sister Magda.
Oh, okay.
Sister Magda.
Okay, cool.
St. Peter's.
Okay, cool. So basically, you, after leaving St. Martin, you went to the Netherlands and studied. But interestingly, you studied law. What was the motivation behind that? Was that a teacher or your parent, or maybe you on your own self who figured out that this would be a good study to be in? And you could tell us about that.
Yes. Well, when I left the island, I chose law. Mm-hmm. The idea what I had in mind was to start off with law, and I always heard that you could do a master's and head towards governmental law. Mm-hmm. And that was the original idea what I had when I left the island.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Governmental law. So I guess you had aspirations of being a politician, being in government, or being an actual lawyer.
It was unclear for me. I just knew for myself I wanted to go in that direction, mm-hmm. and I said for myself, as I go, I'll figure it out along the way. So it wasn't towards becoming a politician, or so it was really a hype back then when I chose to study. Like everyone was saying, start off with law, then you can choose this direction. They also mentioned to me that along the way, you'll see different options. So in either way, you know where you're heading to and see where you come out. Okay.
So then I'm curious about, having gone through law school and stuff, what was your experience like as far as the workforce is concerned?
Okay, that's a very interesting thing, because I studied law, and during studying law, I didn't choose public law, like in that direction after all. Mm-hmm. I chose financial law. And the reason why I did that is during my study, I had to deal with a lot of personal situations. And I realized for myself that if I studied financial law, I would know a lot of how to handle those personal situations. So it was kind of a personal motivation.
Kind of like to help yourself. I gotcha.
Yeah, and let's say in particular, my mother passed away.
Oh,
so at a very young age, I had to learn a lot about financial management, about myself. And then when I saw to study financial law, back then it was a relatively new study, mm-hmm. I said, you know what, that's the direction what I want to go in, because I think that's going to give me the most options with what I'm dealing with personally. Mm-hmm. So that's how the change happened. And to be honest, I don't regret it, because it's like I learned so much from doing that study that I appreciate it. I appreciate that I chose that route and exactly what I set out to do, like learning certain skills, learning about money, learning about the financial system. Up to today in my career, that has helped me tremendously.
I see. Well, listening to you talk about that reminds me of Malcolm X's quote. Education is a passport. The future belongs to those who prepare for it today. Because, and that is a beauty of the opportunity to be able to study, because it could be maybe you have a reason for giving back to society, or honestly, you have a reason, like in your case, you wanted to increase your knowledge in a particular area. But through that, now you've gained the knowledge to help you give back to others as well, which I think is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and it was a really great experience. Like let's say doing that study, because after that study, I immediately started to work in the financial industry. I started to work by a bank up there, and then after that bank, I moved on to another financial institution that processes payments. So in general, they call them a payment service provider. But basically, a payment service provider, what they do is money needs to reach from one person's bank account to the other, and just in their case, they did it for like thousands of people.
Gotcha. So one thing I would like if you can share with us, Carlvin, if you can, I'm curious to know if you can detail your experience, studying financial law in particular, because one, so you said that wasn't necessarily the area you was planning to go in, but I can imagine definitely any studies like law, medicine and so forth requires a lot of reading, a lot of focus, dedication. So what was it like for you? Do you find that, especially with your mom having passed away, how were you able to, commit to your studies and so forth? What was your life like back then in that moment?
Yeah, to a great extent, chaotic. I mean, you're trying to balance personal life, you're trying to balance study life, and you're trying to be successful. You want to finish off your study, and it's like, what I had to come to terms with was the route what, let's say, the traditional student would take wasn't the route for me. And by that I mean it's like some students have two parents or one parent who they really lean on, who really support them with their study. And in my case, the pillar for myself was my mother, and then she wasn't there anymore. So it's like you're adjusting to that process and then learning how to stand on your own. So it's like inside of the study itself, I use all of the facilities of the university. And it's like, now, for instance, I'm a law teacher. What I try my best to do with students is I tell them, hey, listen, if you're dealing with something personally, especially the students who come from the islands, because a lot of the time we are struggling with a lot of personal issues. We are going through the struggles. What we have to deal with is you cannot compare them to students who live and grew up in the Netherlands. And a lot of the times we think that we're alone going through those struggles. So from my end, I used all of the facilities of the university. I did not care what they labeled me as. I did not care if they said it's going to take longer to finish off your study or anything. All I had in front of me was, will I get my diploma if I do this? And if I do that, if I follow your advice, will I get my diploma? And they were like, yes, if you do it, you work hard, you'll get it. And that was the only thing what was of concern to me. And even heading through that route now, I find that as a law teacher, because I'm also doing like guidance counseling for students, I find that because I went through that personal experience, I can relate to them a lot quicker. And especially if I see someone from the islands, I'm like, hey, come here. Let's sit down. Hey, how are you doing? What's going on? And the stories what they tell are similar to mine. So at the end of the day, it was a difficult process. It was something difficult to go through. And at the other end of it, and I say this like respectfully, I appreciate the struggles what I went through, because now I can relate to others who are going through that similar struggle and help them with getting their diploma. Yeah.
So that chaoticness, in a sense, has transformed into something, for lack of a better word, magical. Where you're able to help others raise above their own struggles. Yes. You could say. So one thing in particular, Carlvin, I have a lot of students and parents, who would listen to the program. So I haven't studied law, but even financial law, because I can't say that I know many persons from St. Martin who has studied that. Can you share a bit about the study itself? Of course, it is essential, but why? I guess why would you encourage someone to go into that field in particular, and the benefit that would come out of that?
Okay. Yes. Sure. How I describe the study most of the time to people is that, for instance, when you head to a bank, we see a bank as a place what has a lot of money. So we see it as like the place to go for money. But you can also see it as a shop. So like just like how you walk into a shop, you're buying different products. On the end of the bank, then you're purchasing financial products. So for instance, if you go for a mortgage is a financial product. Or if you go for a different type of, let's say a loan is a version of a financial product. So just like how you would work with a shop, someone has to bring the products or supply the shop with products. So you have a supplier at the end of the back end of the shop. The same thing applies for banks. Someone on the end of banks have to supply them with the money what they need in order to provide that financial product for you. So what I studied is when it comes to that process, so supplying financial institutions such as a bank with financial products, I studied how that worked, and also how you reach the end user of that product, which are the people who are taking the loans. So that's the process itself. What financial law also does is that, on one end, that's like just on a bank level. But financial law also focuses on when are we talking about a good product, or is some products is like if you head into a drugstore. On top of the bottles, if you have like children, there's a protection on top of it to prevent children from taking all type of tablets and
consuming them.
Yeah, consuming them, and with all type of crazy results if they do that. That same thing applies for the financial industry. Not every product is suitable for certain people, or you want to educate certain people before they make use of the financial product. So in a sense, like financial law covers the entire system when it comes to financial products, how they're created, who uses them, and how to go about gaining access to those products.
Okay. So I'm going to actually use your questions on you, especially the last one. And the reason why is because, I've noticed a sort of anxiety or maybe a fear that people would have when it comes to approaching banks, lending agencies. Let's say, we have the credits, we have the NRPB, ESP project and stuff for entrepreneurs and stuff. People, well, for whatever reason, maybe because of the requirements that are there and so forth may seem daunting. So for one, the question, in terms of the question you just asked, how can one, for someone who's listening who wants to, who has a great idea, but needs capital, wants to go out and get a loan, for example. I guess one, starting off with the mindset of understanding, I guess how you break it down in terms of, let's say, the bank being a shop. But also approaching an institution, to be able to get a loan and to get the support you need, and then building off from there.
Yes. Very loaded question. I love it. Okay, then I'll approach it in this way. Mm-hmm. When it comes to anyone who has an idea that they see themselves like doing, so let's say they want to start their own company, the main part about it is that if you have a company, people are coming towards you for a certain reason. And that's the main thing what you're providing for them. That's the main service or main product what you're providing for them. And how you should see it is when people come towards you for that, let's say if you're here's a good example. If you're selling Johnny Cakes, it's like people are coming towards you for Johnny Cakes, and at the end of the day, you give them a Johnny Cake, and then they're happy. What you have to make sure do is that for every transaction what you have, that it's not costing you more than you're gaining. So let's say if it takes you, it costs you $10 to buy all what you need to do, buy dough, buy those different type of products, you should at least sell it for $12 to make some type of profit off of it. And on a small level, if you're constantly busy with making sure that the transactions, what you're doing, and when I say transactions, like that's one example of it for the Johnny Cakes, but maybe you're also selling drinks, you're also selling different type of Johnny Cakes, you're also selling different type of products when people come towards you. Per transaction, if you make sure that you're getting more than what you're giving out, that's the basis. And after you have that, when it comes to like the loan requirements, because what a loan basically does in a situation like that is it helps you scale what you're doing. So perhaps you started off and you were just doing things at home, but then you want more. You want more money, more capital in order to like rent a place, in order to like do advertisements on the radio, do advertisements online, set up a website so that more people are aware of what you're doing. You want to market yourself a bit. So the loan itself can be used for those different type of those additions. But before you even reach there, if for yourself you find that that's a lot of work, then one part about entrepreneurship, what people underestimate, is you have to learn to work together with others. You have to learn to work together with other institutions. A good example is, for instance, the Chamber of Commerce. They're constantly busy. And from the Netherlands, I've been noticing this. They're putting together workshops. They're putting together different things
Seminars.
online. In this COVID situation, they're reaching out to people. And the reason why they're doing that is when you want to become an entrepreneur, you have to learn to think differently. And one major thing is you have to learn to work together with people that you know one part and they know the other, and together you have more. So I would say that's something what you should also consider if the requirements from a bank is difficult when it comes to the loans, or working with suppliers is difficult for you. Doesn't mean that your idea cannot work. It just means you have to network a bit and find people who know things what you don't know.
Gotcha. Okay, so on that note, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the News Behind the News with Ralph Contav on Mix 94.7 FM. And I am joined with Mr. Carlvin Brooks, law teacher at the Rotterdam University of Applied Sciences. And so we were last speaking on entrepreneurship, basically, the process of, basically approaching institutions to take your business to a further level. But one of the things too, I'm glad you spoke about working together, because that is essential. And often, we, especially recently, I've heard many talks about group economics, the need for even collaborations amongst particularly us as locals and so forth, as we've seen over the years, many other groups do the same thing. The one thing that comes into mind while listening to you is, of course, the process of setting up a business plan. I think that in itself as well is... people may wonder sometimes, okay, my business plan, what exactly do I put into it? How long does it have to be and whatnot? So in your experience, what would you say are the absolute essentials in the process of, setting up one's business plan, and the need for it too, especially when approaching a loan agency or so forth?
Yes. Okay, well, thanks for that question. I would say the first thing to keep in mind when putting together a business plan is you have to map out what you want to do first. So let's say if someone wants to, let's say sell phones. What it basically means is that you have to perhaps order a cell phone from abroad or have a local supplier. You have to probably pay them a certain amount before you get the cell phone. Then you put down the cell phone next to you. And then on the other end, you have to find out how much you're going to sell it for. You have to find out what kind of people want a cell phone so that you can reach them. You also have to think about how you're going to market it. Are you going to do it word of mouth? Are you going to go on Facebook, create a page, make a wonderful picture of that cell phone, put together a nice video? And then eventually, if someone comes in, you sell it to them. That process itself is your business. So it's not more complicated than that when it comes to the idea of a business. When it comes to a business plan itself, with a business plan, you spend time in detailing what exactly you're doing. So I would say what I see people do is they start off immediately with a business plan, and from a business plan, they try to map out the process what they'll be applying, and then they get stuck. Because a business plan, for a lot of people, is theoretical. Even for me, it's theoretical. So even when I'm doing business plans, sometimes I work together with people who are familiar with that area. And people might say, yes, but why don't you do it yourself? Sometimes they even ask me that. And I'm like, well, I want to focus on the process, and I want someone else who's critical of what I'm busy with to look at what I'm doing, scrutinize it, see if there are any things that they find don't make sense, or help me to become aware of things, what I'm doing, that actually does make sense. So even for myself, I try to separate that from what I'm doing, because I want to keep it simple. I want to just say, hey, this is the idea of what I want to do. These are the 3 steps to get it done. And then you have an expert there who has, with business plans, there are all type of things that you have to consider inside of it. Customer, client segmentation, suppliers,
risk,
what makes you unique, how will you make money, all of those different type of things. But I would say that's secondary. That's just basically answering questions based on the simple process what you have. Okay.
So that the first step would really be just outlining your process.
Yes.
You're really knowing what is your product about then.
And exactly what we're talking about now, there's a term called process mapping, and that's what I also do. So let's say I teach law, but in law, there's a way how I choose to teach it, which is along the lines of what they call business architecture. So, for instance, just like how there's a person draws a house,
Correct.
like an architect draws a house and then someone else builds it. On my end, I do that for businesses. So I draw a business, and what I'm basically doing is outlining the process, and as much as I can in the drawing, adding in details to that drawing. And then you hand that drawing over to someone else, and they'll write out what makes sense, and then you have your business plan.
Gotcha. Okay. So, even in that, I'm definitely curious as well, so you basically went into education.
Yes.
You could probably gone into lobbying, the banking sector, trust fund, and so forth. So why that move? What was the motivation for that?
Okay. Then I'll put it like this: when you first know how to map out a business, you can do it basically on any and every level. So when it comes to my study itself, they focused on larger organizations, such as government institutions, such as, let's say, companies that has millions to their disposal. And even for those companies who has millions to their disposal, what they're basically doing is a simple process. As an example, you can create your own iPhone. It'll cost you about $5 million to put it together. Or you can spend a couple of, I think, thousands now, maybe 1.5, and purchase an iPhone from Apple. What you're basically doing is they have a process of turning an expensive thing from like 5 million into a couple of thousands. Why reinvent the wheel? Just make use of their process. But I'm saying that because when you start to focus on processes, it doesn't matter how big the organization is. You try to simplify what they're doing. So I entered education because I learned how to do it for the big companies, but that's not where I come from. I grew up in South-Ward. I grew up with seeing people, selling newspapers on the road and making money, and so that way, paying their bills that way. I grew up with people like seeing them trying to make income, being security guards. Even my brother growing up, I saw him going to the shop, packing bags, making money and being able to buy what he wants. So on one hand, it's nice that I had that international study and you can do a lot of things internationally. But at the end of the day, the people who I grew up with and who I want to reach, they don't have that to their disposal. So entering education helped me a lot to learn how to break down those type of ideas, those type of philosophies, to reach the people who I grew up with.
Makes sense.
So on one end, it's kind of like I did focus on that. That was my key reason for entering education, and I don't regret it now. I love what I'm doing because every day I'm learning how to reach people who I care about better and better and better. The flip side of it is that after I help them, I can help them become that larger organization.
Yeah.
So let's say to round that off, what I tell people is like, if you're seeing people on the road selling food, you can become another person selling food on the road, which I understand. Or you can approach them and see what are the issues they are dealing with when it comes to selling food. Maybe they're having difficulty finding suppliers. Maybe they're having difficulty literally coming to a location. I mean, if you walk around a bit, you're actually busy with market research, if you have to label it like that. Then you find out what needs, what issues they have, and then you can be the supplier to them. And that's a bit higher, or let's say that's a different sector than becoming the person on the road, which basically is competing with them. Then you're no longer competing with them. You're just a step, you're putting yourself as a different part in the market where you're actually assisting them, but on a level what they really need, but are not getting from other people. So I kind of push people to go a bit into that direction.
I gotcha.
Instead of competing.
Yeah. So which goes back to what you said before the break about working together.
Yes.
Yeah, because it's not like you're necessarily working in the person's company, but you're just adding a link to that chain within the economy. Yeah. So there's just a flow within the system, basically.
And that right there, being back on St. Martin just for the period that I've been here, there's so much potential. There is so much potential because in general, people see someone doing something and they try to copy that.
That's true.
which makes sense because it's like it's a lot
Yeah.
easier. It's like
You see it as like, hey, this person make money, then I could do it and make money
exactly.
too. Yeah.
So it's also showing like, hey, if he can do it, then I can do it too. So I understand that it builds a lot of confidence, and also while seeing that, like I've been walking around and I've just been looking like, how are you getting your products? Sometimes I just go and pick up what I need, but they don't know if it's the best price. They don't know who they can get the best prices for. They don't know necessarily what they should sell it for. They just chose a number and they're like, hey, it works, so it's working for me.
Yeah.
And I'm going with the flow. But all of that is room for improvement, room for people to jump in the gaps and help out.
Yes, because, we can really raise our business practices and knowledge of doing business as well. Because, and to what you shared, basically, the danger in doing that also is that, you may end up just working yourself to the ground, but
Yes.
also at a loss, thinking that, okay, you're gaining income, but not necessarily making necessary income. So I'm curious as well then, as given your career field and stuff, what are the essentials, in understanding the financial industry, so the essentials as far as knowledge is concerned that you find the masses or common folk would be in need of,
Yeah. Okay. But then I'll speak from the experience what I have. From my end, I teach a lot to accountancy students,
Okay.
as well as to international business students. So, I'll put it like this: for the international business students, I help them to map out a simple process, but on a international level. So let's say, what kind of products can Simardin export, or what type of services can Simardin export? As an example, e-commerce, like creating websites. You don't need much to do that, but if 200, 300 people and so do that from Simardin, you can do a lot, basically. And then on the other end, for the accountancy students, they focus a lot on how to make a company profitable. Like, I'm saying it like that because there are two pieces that are important for development. On one end, you have to have the idea what you want to do, and on the other end, it has to also be profitable. And when you combine the two with each other, then you get a good business. So I am using that as my reference for it because more than that, you don't really need. You don't need to make it more difficult than that. You just need to start with that. So let's say even for the topic of entrepreneurship, a few years ago, I attended actually a workshop from USC. So
Unified St. Martin Connection, I think.
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
yes, in the Netherlands. So I attended a workshop from them, and it was focused on project management. And in that workshop with the speaker, I realized that if you knew how to do certain things, you'll be able to start your own company. So out of that workshop, the foundation, what I'm also the chairman of, which is called the Unleash Potential Group Foundation, was started. And what that foundation basically does is students like us who are in the Netherlands studying, sometimes they don't want to come back because they don't see opportunities. And in that foundation, we take their concepts, we put it on an international level, so then they see, hey, wait a minute, I can do this. But then you tell them, okay, but how does this apply to St. Martin? So the goal of the foundation is to get students in their study to have a similar system like what you see in Europe and America, have a similar system like that, but then base it on St. Martin. Because you came from St. Martin, you know St. Martin better than any and everyone.
Correct.
And if you're doing a study and you include elements from St. Martin, then you start to see how that idea can work.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How that idea can work on St. Martin. So coming back to project management basically is you have a big idea and you split it up in pieces. So with the foundation, we give them a big idea, and then we also teach them how to split it up in pieces. And if you split it up in pieces, per piece, then you're dealing with a simple process. Then you can turn that simple process into a company, and you go from there. So that's how the different dots connect with each other.
Okay. Basically a trickle-along approach in a sense.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. What I love about what you shared, one, the name, Unleash Potential Group, group of St. Martiners, basically, definitely working towards creating solutions that apply to us here. One, because, we talk about the brain drain factor. But, I ain't gonna lie, I used to feel like in the past that, if you go away to study, if you're from St. Martin, you have to come back home, especially if, you got study financing from St. Martin and so forth, because, at the end of the country invest in you, right?
Yes.
But I've really, I must admit, I've really shifted my thoughts on that. The reason being is because I think that not everyone necessarily has to come back home. And you can, but also because you can contribute to your home while still being away, whether it is by honestly succeeding and being the top of your game, which brings recognition to your homeland, and then using your network and so forth, to contribute towards, let's say maybe sports development, whatever is happening on the island. But also, as you shared, as far as creating research that is necessary in helping us solve, bottlenecks that we have. And so one of the things that come to mind, as you speak of UPG, Unleash Potential Group, as well as entrepreneurship, is that, when you look at Samoan's private sector, and you realize for the most part, it is not necessarily moved by instability on the island. Business is still happening. Yes, some businesses have closed. But even after Irma, up till now, I would say there's a steady rise in new businesses. The Chamber of Commerce, the last time I think they put out their data on that was a few months ago. So that's something worth following up on. But nevertheless, people are starting new businesses. Yes. The process of business can enhance. And so it's like the private sector in itself is functioning as if it doesn't need government. And I don't say that in a bad way, but meaning to say people have realized that, one, and I do agree with that as well, you don't necessarily need government to do everything for you.
Correct.
It is there to facilitate certain things, but also to regulate and then assist particularly those who, need a certain amount of assistance, like students, teachers, the vulnerable in our society and so forth. And so I say all of that to say really, given your because besides teaching, you've worked in larger institutions and stuff. But I guess the bottom line is, when you look at Samoan's private sector, what do you see as far as the gaps that we can fill, particularly in enhancing, the service that we render to our island?
Yeah. Okay. I'll start off with answering a question like this. A lot of people tend to point their finger at the government and expect the government to do everything.
That's true.
And to be honest, before I left the island, I was also one of those people. It's like I always said to myself, yeah, the government should do this and the government should do that. What I find in that discussion is that people tend to not focus on what the government is actually doing. So after starting to work in different institutions and also like in education, I realized that the government has their hands full with certain tasks. Mm-hmm. And some of the other things what a lot of people have expectations for when it comes to the government, I think the people who are in government, if they could do it, this is my personal belief, it's like if they could do it, they would. I haven't had personal experiences like to make me think different. So with that said, when it comes to the private sector, it's actually really good to want to do things without government, because government is doing what they can in areas where you can't contribute on that level. But in another area, there's that gap what you can fill. So, and you mentioned, let's say, to do it on a certain level, that's where it becomes a bit tricky, because not much people know, for instance, the function of the Chamber of Commerce. And that's the beginning point when you want to become an entrepreneur or when you want to become a foundation. You have to get yourself registered there, because once you're registered there, how you should see the Chamber of Commerce is that that's a database or a place where certain information about companies is listed. So if you're doing business, a lot of it consists of trust. Like if I give you 100 guilders, I want to get what I paid for. If you're doing that with people on the road, you don't necessarily have a system to trust them. But once you're registered, you have a certain minimum. And that's where the Chamber of Commerce comes in. But next to the Chamber of Commerce, there are also different institutions that push people to work together. And not much people know about that also, because it's a bit vague, it's a bit general. So even for those other institutions, and I'm even mentioning it as institutions, and people might be listening to it and be like, "What does he mean with institutions?" And that's the problem. It's not really clear what all is available from the private sector. Just like how we know government, we know there's a ministry of it's not only education but ECYS.
Yeah.
There's a ministry of tourism. There's a ministry of justice. We know that there are ministries. We don't necessarily know what they all do, but
or all the departments within.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we know that they exist. On a private sector level, there are also similar institutions. But we don't know that because the discussion is mostly held on government.
I follow you.
So I would say when it comes to the private sector, let's say for the person who wants to start, just start off first with mapping out your process. And when you contact an advisor, ask them, use your knowledge of the government to kind of say, hey, from a private sector angle, who does something similar to this? And then you become shocked when you realize what's available from the private sector's perspective.
We got you. I'm glad you shared that, because the next thing that comes to mind, I kind of go back to UPG in a sense, is the essentials of networking, working together. Because I'm curious, what was it like for you in getting, students to understand what you shared as far as, pooling these, whether it's like the solutions for larger entities, but dissecting them, or that they can flow into our system here in St. Martin.
Yes, let's say for that the greatest difficulty what I've had when it comes to our people from the island is for them to recognize that they're doing a study that the island needs. And when I say that, it's like they learn certain things abroad, and then they look back at the island and sometimes they say, why is it not there? The reason why it's not there is because no one did what you're doing, or not much people did what you're doing. So the fact that you know that it's not there means it can be your job to put it there. And then you have the two routes what you can choose. You can look towards doing it via, let's say they call it public law, so via the let's say the government structure, or private law, which basically means outside of government. So you have two major categories in which you can choose to bring that idea into fruition. But getting them to understand that the fact that you can pose that question shows that you see something what others may not see. And it's not something to be critical about, like government, because once again, they have their hands full. That's my philosophy, and I'll keep standing by that. They have their hands full. Getting them out of that mindset is the most difficult part. But from the minute you get them out of the mindset, sometimes they start to feel like, and it's a personal feeling. I'm not saying that it's so, but it's a personal feeling what they get. They start to feel a bit sad because they kind of expected the government to be the strong person, the strong entity. So they're like, but if government is not capable of this, then there's no hope.
I see what you're saying. That is a common sentiment indeed.
Yeah, and then it's to tell them, no, it's not that. It's just that you're learning so much and you're gaining so much experience that on your end, you can do things what perhaps some people in government may not have the time to do. So it's actually showing that you're learning something. So you should be proud of yourself. Don't turn it into a negative sentiment.
Correct.
Be proud of yourself that you're learning something and you're seeing how it can be of meaningful contribution to where you're coming from. And then you start to guide them along that process. So it's a bit of a growing up feeling of like, oh, so this is the responsibility, what is on myself. And then you tell them, yes, it's your responsibility.
Yeah, I'm glad you shared that, because there is a need to also push through. Because one, I'm curious on your take as well, because, in a sense, the bottom line usually is also the financial factors as far as payment, income, what you may get, whether if you remain in the States, Netherlands, Canada, etc., France, whatever, versus coming home to St. Martin. But also that resistance. But, anything of value is worth fighting for. And that is my personal outlook, which is, so many people, have shared their experience, facing whether it's resistance, backlog, and so forth.
When you say resistance, what do you mean with resistance?
Resistance, I would say, trying to make a change and feeling like, you're not seeing...
Oh, you're not seeing progress.
Yeah, you're not seeing progress. But, I guess personal moments, like, in realizing, for example, like in my case, I'm still in my 20s. It's like, can I change the world right away? Can I change the island right away? Do you change right away? In that sense. So I'm thinking. I'm saying that to say, I think we must also shift our thinking and kind of thinking more long term. Yes, you would like all of us, for example, just like for there to be better internet on Simad. You know what I mean? But I think it's with consistent lobbying, brainstorming solutions, conversations, advocating as well. So all those combinations, just consistently pushing towards change, then you will see the change.
And what you just mentioned with the internet, I'll put this in. It's like in general we have to be a lot more positive. Like I'm from the island too. Just be a lot more positive with what we have, because in some other Caribbean islands, if you go to certain areas, you don't have a connection at all. So sometimes we're talking about, we want faster internet, but on other islands they're not even worrying about internet. They're just worrying about connection. So it's like, I learned that when I came down here too, and someone mentioned, hey, when I travel to this and this island, I don't even have a connection. So I'm happy I have that here. So it's like, with going forward with that long-term approach, it's like, push to be positive about it. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, because it will break you down if you stay, if you maintain a negative or too overly critical. Whoops, Mike. Yeah, if you maintain an overly critical mindset, like yes, you're critical because you want to see a change in your nation. So it's like hey, let's shape up ourselves. But the bottom line or an underlying factor is that you have to also be involved in creating that change. That is necessary, and that is where, as you said well, the government has their hands full. So what can we do? What can I do? Carlvin, the next thing that comes to mind is the fact that, as the world moves towards, digital efficiency, crypto is like dominating the conversations of the financial world, I find, at least in Twitter and so forth, NFTs, but also more so accountability, reducing anti-money laundering, and just overall greater scrutiny or transparency in the financial market. Looking at St. Martin, I'm curious on your take on ways in which we can improve our financial industry, because there's always conversations revolving around the banking sector in St. Martin and how we can help or benefit the people and so forth. So I'm curious on your take on that.
That's a good one.
Any thoughts you've had on that?
I'll start off with this. Like a lot of people understand loans. So you borrow money from someone, you have to pay them back. And internationally, I think most people can understand that with loans, you can deal with millions, and even, let's say, if you push it a bit, billions. Let's say when it comes to finances, loans is one category. There are about 12 others. So which means 12 alternatives to loans as we know them. And then you can also make combinations between those. So when it comes to education, or let's say the financial industry, a lot of people don't know that that's possible, so they go back to loans. Mm-hmm. And if you know that there are about like 13 different categories, then you can make your own like jigsaw puzzle and put together something that works for you. Our financial professionals, let's say the students who are abroad, they should at least know that. Because on the island, sometimes we struggle with financing certain activities. And if our own people know that exists, then we become the financial experts to make sure that we can pay for certain things on the island. Because let's say even when it comes to the banks themselves, and I'm saying this because I spoke with certain people inside of the banking industry on the island, so it's not just my ideas, people who I'm speaking with and they gave their opinion. Mm-hmm. It's not easy. So it's not easy on the end of the bank to work inside of the bank, and then on the other end, it's not easy to work with the clients of the bank, meaning that sometimes they just don't know. Sometimes they're dealing with certain things and they do not understand the procedures. They do not understand what's possible. So a lot has to be done in the area of of helping people to become financially literate.
Literate. Mm-hmm.
So with that said, it's like I started off even developing an app along those lines to foster financial literacy. And when developing that app, I realized the terms what I use in the financial industry are not terms what people use every day. So even for that application, I'm reaching out to different financial institutions. I'm reaching out to different financial advisors because they understand the terms and they are working with the people.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm looking at is what are the standards that work for St. Martin? Not necessarily just for a person on the road, but what works for us? What is our identity when it comes to finances? Maybe we're doing better than what we think. Maybe not. I would beg for more that we're doing better than what we think, but we just don't have the necessary information to prove that. So on that level, let's say then this is more towards what I'm busy with as my personal aspirations, is connecting those people so that we can, in either case, find out what are the issues that St. Martin is dealing with when it comes to the financial industry, because it's not necessarily anti-money laundering and terrorism financing and those type of things. It's more along the lines of we just do not understand what is money. And because we do not understand what is money, it may look like we're doing criminal activities when we're not. It may look like we're doing certain bad things, or it may look a certain way because the information is not there to prove that we're not doing it that way. So the perception itself is important. And because I have to be a bit balanced and so with it, there are people there are institutions who take advantage of the system. I understand that. But to be honest, that's someone else's job. I'm not going to focus on that. Mm-hmm. I'm going to focus on the other end of what are we doing good and how can we get those things better. And what is really missing when it comes to that is the necessary data to even come with an assumption of how to become better.
I got you. And even as you share that, one of the essentials I find is really the profession you're in, education.
Yes.
The reason I say that is because, for example, you went to MPC. I'm not sure what, I guess you just fall in line with the Dutch education system.
Yeah.
But like persons like myself who did CXE, which is Caribbean examination system, is, you see a need for a change right now, like since yesterday, but right now, especially for the direction that the courses students learn, because with just the introduction of the metaverse alone, when you start listening to what it's offering, certain jobs are going to be obsolete. It may not affect us here right away, but it will still have an effect. When you think about just thinking about hospitality in the metaverse, that in itself is like, you could kind of say mind-blowing as far as the need for more content creators, producers, and people who code and all that stuff. So I'm curious on your take as far as ways in which we can start tweaking our curriculum, because one, there's especially along millennials, Gen X, Gen Z, people and stuff, you see a greater call for, as you said, financial literacy, persons wanting to study more, to learn more about just, for example, doing taxes and the usual stuff that help you succeed in life itself, opposed to just learning, not just rudimentary, but lessons that assist you in the testing factor of school. You know what I mean?
Yes, that's a very interesting one, because one thing what as a educator on my end I saw when it came to COVID was there are a lot of options that are available without physically having to go to a location. So right now the hype is blended learning. I started off along those lines when in my own profession in the Netherlands. And very quickly, I was, placed in a team that's responsible for digital innovation inside of the university, which I'm thankful of. And inside of that team, when it came to the concept of blended learning, it basically came down to recording fancy videos and giving it to students. What I quickly realized is students were not watching my videos. So I did all of the work to put together videos, and they were not watching it. So which meant more needed to be done. So I changed that concept into blended teaching, and blended teaching has two parts of it. On one part, the part where you're sending information to the students. So traditional teaching, to put it like that. And the other part has to do with testing competencies, because towards the future, you do not need to know everything. We can Google so much. If I need to know something, I can go on YouTube, go through a short couple of videos and so about it. Sometimes there are even university courses on Google.
And podcasts and so forth.
Podcasts, you name it. There's so much available online. When it comes to knowledge, you don't necessarily need to go to an institution for the knowledge, but the application of the knowledge is something else.
Yes.
So I'm focusing on that. I even worked on creating like a type of educational course where students in the course are providing information for companies. So a company has a problem. In the course, we teach them general stuff about, let's say that course, let's say in my case, I teach them general things about law. But when it comes to the questions are literally based on that company, what they know. And what I'm actually trying to do is I'm trying more and more to bring in St. Martin companies and St. Martin examples into that, so that when the students answer questions and so on, it's directly related to St. Martin. But you mentioned another point too, which is the metaverse. And that's basically like being in the Netherlands while you're here. You put on a couple of 3D glasses and bam, you're seeing the Netherlands as if it's right in front of you. I'm actually working with a company in the Netherlands to digitize education up to that point. That you have classrooms, and inside of the classroom, just like how you're seeing a physical classroom, you at home, you put on those glasses, and then you're in that environment and you're looking around. And the company was even explaining that it's even possible that you're literally seeing that person physically moving around in that location with your 3D glasses on. And I said, that's a very interesting approach for dealing with COVID, because who knows how long we'll have to deal with it. But also in the extension, after COVID, it doesn't necessarily mean we have to go back to the traditional way.
Because we've also been, our wiring has changed.
Yes.
And this is what we're gonna third year into this. So, it's, for example, it's almost becoming normal to see someone wear a mask. You know what I mean? And those type of factors. Yeah. So
and with what you're saying with the metaverse, what I'm looking at is if you can put on those type of glasses and basically be anywhere in the world. Before I didn't know that was possible, I sat down with a company and I placed those glasses on, and I was like
blown away.
It was amazing.
No, so that's why I'm glad you said that. You know why? Like I remember when so for example, I remember doing a workshop when I was back in college. We were learning how to produce news for virtual reality. 3D news stories and stuff, which is pretty cool. Because after going through the workshop, one, they gifted us some Oculus headsets.
Great.
Yeah, free on the house. It was the workshop was sponsored by Facebook. As a result, no Meta. But in any case, basically during the workshop, what we actually did was, one, we had to write a script for 3D, which one, it enhances how you write, because you don't have to write considering the senses, because opposed to you have to consider what's happening behind you, what's happening inside of you, what's happening above, below, because you have on these VR headsets, so you have to be looking around, up and down, sideways, side to side, etc. And then with that, after writing the script, we actually had to shoot a video. What we decided to do was create a emergency shooting or fire drill in the school. And so, so with that, I was like, wondering, how soon would this really be a reality? But when you look at it now, it's like, if these are things we work at right now, listen, we done plant our stakes in the game. And so I'm thinking it's for St. Martin, hoping that we don't wait until it's too late, but honestly, our curriculums, they need a shift, because the future is here. Let's put it like that.
Yeah, and that's the important part of these, let's say, educational systems. You shouldn't try to change what is being done. Like, that's not my approach for it. My approach is to find out what is being done and then present it in different ways. Because let's say...
Gotcha. I follow you.
What I just mentioned with that, with 3D, metaverse, that type of approach... in UPG, that came from one of the members. And when it came to that member, we outlined their idea, like, what do you want to do? What's the process? So I don't know the details of it. When I heard it, I was like, this is amazing in concept, but that person is doing it. So it's like, it's no longer like, impossible to think of it because I have someone in front of me who's literally doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And now the question is, how can you apply that in an educational setting? And that's what, on my end, since I'm in education, I was able to map that out, and we're checking to see if other institutions in the Netherlands, as well as here, are interested in those type of ideas. But that's from our own people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we're not talking about some company who does not know our culture, who does not know who we are. Our own people are thinking of these ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other part of it is, do we know that?
Yes.
Do we even know that our own people are capable of these amazing things? How are we keeping track of that? So in this entire setup, especially when it comes to education, like that's possible. That's one of the options what are possible. The next part of it is that there are many others who are doing amazing things too. What is missing is a way to help us to reach to that point that we see ourselves that way. Because for some reason here on the island, and us as island people, we tend to see others as being better than us.
Yeah, that inferiority complex.
We tend to see if two people are standing in a room and one is the local person who you grew up with, who you went to school with, you remember that one time when he like took your sandwich and he was angry with him, and then you give someone else the deal, as an example.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But our own people are doing amazing things.
That's true.
But we have to see it as amazing things to actually appreciate them.
Yeah, value. It starts with value. Yeah,
so it's like
yourself and people.
Let's say from an educational perspective, what I'm doing basically now is just mapping out all of these crazy type of ideas, to put it like that.
Mm-hmm.
Checking to see from our own people who know stuff about who study in finances, because they can pay for those structures. What I show people is you have a business idea and you have the way to pay for it. A lot of people connect the two with each other, but if you know enough about finances, if you know enough about money, you can disconnect the two from each other. So basically, any idea, it's possible to pay for it. So what are the ideas that we want to do?
Gotcha. So on that note, any final words?
Yes. What I find is really important is you do not need to have. Let's say there are a lot of people who got the opportunity to study, and they others who didn't. What I would say that connects to both are like competencies. Like if you want to do something, if you're reliable, if you're trustworthy, you're open for feedback, you want to learn things,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not quickly offended. Those are important skills because you do not need to know everything. Mm-hmm. If you know someone who knows who knows that area, you can work with them. There's a great book called Think and Grow Rich. And inside of that book, one main thing what the author, Napoleon Hill, wrote about was, if I know how to connect the right people, I can get the job done. You can be the connector. It has nothing to do with your diploma. It has nothing to do with your study. Because even if you have a diploma, you have to do the same things. You can have the best diploma in the world, but you still have to learn how to work with people. You still have to be able to connect with people. You still have to be able to have social skills to interact with people. And if you don't want that, get someone around you who has social skills, because that can stop any entrepreneurial idea what you have if you do not know how to interact with people.
Facts.
So for the ones who may be listening to this and they do not have that educational background, do not see that as a flaw. Do not see that as something bad. Check to see the person around you who's doing who has that knowledge. Ask them questions and just do it. What has worked for me throughout my entire career is I would talk with the most brilliant minds, and I would wonder why they're not doing what they tell me. And then I stopped wondering, and I started to write down. They said do step 1, 2, 3, and then I did step 1, 2, and 3, and I got the results.
Yep.
So now I'm starting to become known as, if you tell him an idea, he'll do it. But anyone can do that.
Correct.
So it has nothing to do with my education. It has nothing to do with my background. It simply has to do with, if someone tells me something, I take them serious and do it. And that's enough.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much, Carlvin, for that. And I appreciate that. And to our viewers and listeners, I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. And so do take care until the next one tomorrow. Goodbye. Boom. An hour, 1 minute. So you got just enough time.